The impact of pregnancy on the pelvic floor. We have a growing baby. It disrupts that core canister, like we talked about. There's added weight and pressure down onto the pelvic floor and just increased impact down onto the pelvic floor. So even if you have a C-section or the baby doesn't come through the pelvic floor, there is an impact on the pelvic floor, and we need to keep that in consideration. So when I say like monitoring or looking for what's happening in the pelvic floor, incontinence, either urinary or fecal incontinence, oftentimes it's a tightness, compression, inability to distribute forces, more than it is a weakness of the pelvic floor, feelings of heaviness, bulging or dragging in the pelvis, pain either in like the SI joint or the pubic symphysis, and then things that, all these things might happen with exercise, and then pain with sex, difficulty with pooping are all signs that there's something happening in the pelvic floor we might need to evaluate. So in any of these cases, I would definitely recommend seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist. Like if you're feeling any of these, or if your client is feeling any of these things, at least once during pregnancy and postpartum, no matter what. But then, if you're having symptoms, that's a really important piece there. Help very much, because the pelvic floor works with everything. It doesn't just hold up your internal organs and control voiding. It helps modulate intra-abdominal pressure. We diaphragm and pelvic floor move together. It's partially responsible for stability in the SI joint, control of the lumbar spine and pelvis. It contributes to postural and respiratory functions. It does a lot. It can also be like overworking to create stability, and that's what's causing your pelvic floor dysfunction. And then it also could be like the other way around. The pelvic floor is not fully doing its job, and that presents as hip pain or glute pain or like other things going on. So everything is like connected there, and the pelvic floor is not just this thing that like holds in pee. It's part of it, and that's a very like obvious symptom of the pelvic floor, but it's so much more than that. If we look at like running specifically, the pelvic floor naturally contracts and relaxes with every single step of your stride, even before the heel strikes the ground. There's two things I like to point out in this graph. The heel strike, you see there's already a pre-contraction of the pelvic floor before that even happens. And then at rest while standing line here, it's above that the entire time. Just like any other muscle, it can get tired, and we need to do like progressively build up the endurance of that muscle. So holding tension, holding tightness, squeezing the pelvic floor like is not the thing. It's the opposite of the thing that we like need to do. And another thing I like to point out here, because we talked a lot about like restoring that rotation and that reciprocal motion, this, in my opinion, this is really just like me looking at the data, interpreting it based on everything else I know, but there's this pre-contraction that happens. Why does that pre-contraction happen? Well, you're already rotating, right? You're at toe off, you're rotated as far as you're going to go to one side, and then you're already rotating back to the other side before that foot even strikes the ground. Then you continue to rotate. So that rotation piece, being able to internally and externally rotate at the pelvis, being able to rotate at the thorax and putting those pieces together is huge for pelvic floor function. And it can be with rotation, but it can also be finding that stack with squatting and moving through internal external rotation at the pelvis there, and our different layers of the squat.